That was me 2 weeks ago. I collapsed on the floor. I had a double pulmonary embolism. Not sexy, not hot, not cute. I went to open email 6:05 in the morning, and a student was thanking me for writing a letter of recommendation so he could get into UC Davis, and he got in, and he's going to be a doctor. Well, I fucking needed one, and I fell and collapsed on the floor, and my wife saved my life and called the ambulance. 5 hot guys. I was told I can't tell hotness level for men, but my wife told me they were hot. Came in and revived me on the chair. I was barely breathing. I had 5% lung capacity due to a lung clot, double pulmonary embolism. There's that term again. And I can't believe that happened around the week that this healthcare thing is going on, this healthcare episode. So it's coming out right when I'm coming back out of the hospital. So we'll talk about that. And I should mention, as a notice for this episode, which came out a couple weeks earlier, that Speaker Anthony Rendon has blocked SB 562, single payer in California. Even though he has a supermajority in the House and the Senate, the Democrats own the entire apparatus of the California government. But because they're owned by so much money in politics, they're not wanting to actually broach the topic of single payer in California. So it's been kind of a frustrating 3 or 4 weeks with those two things going on. And I'm glad to be back with you guys. And so my comments about SB 562 were written before Anthony did a cock block on the bill. And we'll see what happens in the weeks ahead if we are going to get 20th century invention, universal health care for the 21st century. Welcome to the Future is a Mixtape. This is Matt.
This is Jesse.
We're going to talk about dry humping each other over healthcare.
We're not only going to talk about it, we're going to do it.
Exactly. And this is our longest podcast. I apologize. It's going to be like Lord of the Rings, hopefully, where the fighting scenes happen, and it's not just the huge panning of people walking through mountains.
It's all action.
Exactly.
This is all action.
This is a big one. This is the, once again, the third node of the Golden Square, healthcare.
Yes.
Why do we not have universal healthcare access and rights?
What the fuck is wrong with us?
Clusterfuck Opaza.
Yeah.
Exactly. I want Paul Ryan to solve that problem for me, but first I have to kill him. I'll use his organs to help. Of course, I'm joking. But, once again, I think the thing is, let's get healthcare. You
don't want to, what's her name?
We'll do organ harvesting. We could.
You're getting into...
I'm getting into Kathy Griffin's zone.
Yeah, don't
Thankfully,
don't go
I'm not
there.
employed by CNN and Reza Aslan.
Yeah, don't go there.
Exactly. Free speech. We believe in it.
Yes, free speech.
Exactly. And so this is going to be a long podcast. Hold on through and hear about why we don't have health care, why we should.
Enjoy.
Jesse, did your parents, when they gave birth to you, they wanted you to have health care?
No, of course not.
They didn't want you to have health care.
Of course not. That'd be un-American. Parents were, they were God-fearing Americans.
They said, earn it.
Yeah.
Little fucking tiger.
Fucking shithead.
Tiger of capitalism.
Yeah.
They said, you got
to... No. It was the same as the advice about money. You're right.
Find someone wealthy to get it for you.
Yeah.
Just
marry into it.
Wow, that was really incredibly sweet of them.
Yeah, well, born in the back of a pickup truck.
Well, yeah, I mean...
I'm just kidding. I was born in a hospital.
We talked about shelter and food, but I was wondering, you had siblings. How was healthcare dealt with in Alaska in the 1980s?
In the 1980s.
Synthesizers and flock of seagulls. What was healthcare like in Alaska?
Well, that's a good question. There was...
They wrap kids in salmon skin when there's cuts?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Of course.
Open heart surgery would just throw you in the river and dump rocks on you.
Yeah.
That was CPR.
Just cut open the stomach of a moose or a black bear.
We'll skin you like a bear.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure. This was never a topic of discussion in the household. Nothing was, actually, because it was a fucking clamped down.
Because God had everything under control?
God had everything under control. And then, so...
Only if you're Jehovah's Witness, you you can't even do blood transfusions.
Oh,
so,
yeah. Oh, yeah. That's
So you just have to live with the blood you have.
Exactly. That's it.
If it drains out of your body, just hope
when it runs out,
it crawls back from the concrete back into your body.
Yeah, when it runs out, it runs out.
Did your parents carry cups around to collect the blood if you got injured? Because they're so worried you'd lose the blood.
Yeah, the little Dixie cup with me at all times. Drip, drip, drip.
We can reinsert it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, for me, healthcare was kind of just a given. My dad had a good job, and by any standard of that time, working at the Hanford Reservation site, which is a major nuclear waste site, one of I think the largest nuclear waste site in North America, and was used for the nuclear fusion aspects.
Manhattan Project.
Yeah, it was used for the bombing in Nagasaki. So that was called, I think it's the Fat Man, or there was the Little Man. Was
Fat Boy?
Well, yeah, and so my dad had health care because his job was through essentially at one point contracting with the government.
When you're 10 years old and you asked them about it?
I didn't think about healthcare. I just thought everyone had it. I found out later, and I was kind of just shocked. Just shocked. Like, I was just, because it wasn't something we talked about as if it's something you went without.
Right. My father worked for the public utility electrical company, so he had medical insurance through that employer situation. But there were 5 fucking kids. A few of them were born, 2 of them, I think, were born in homes, like natural childbirth in homes. I don't even think that was covered. It probably was out of pocket, right? I don't think. I don't know. It's good. These are good questions.
Yeah.
Never.
Because now it's starting to be talked about as something that should be covered and is covered by some programs. But I mean, healthcare for me became more dangerous when my dad lost his job in 1995. He lost his job the year I was graduating from high school.
Well, with your mother's mental health, there must have been some.
It helped a lot. It helped a lot when they got divorced. When I was.
Did she seek treatment at all, or was it like taboo? As mental health was until
she basically was taken care of through Medicare, a version of Medicaid, because she was mentally unwell. She was bipolar. She'd had several hospitalizations. I think that was the financial stress for my parents. Like, the degree at which she was hospitalized was quite a bit, but it wasn't something my dad talked about. But when they got divorced, it actually made it easier for my dad because she could be covered through.
How many times was she hospitalized while you were a kid?
She was actually studied for bipolar disorder. She was hospitalized.
She was part of a study for.
She was part of a study because her bipolar disorder was so severe. So she was hospitalized 22 times in her lifetime. My mom, Charlene. So 22 times in hospitals. So I remember just regularly.
That's impressive. I have a ways to go to get there.
Yeah, I need to go beyond my own hospitalization. But I mean, 22 times.
22 times, and how many have you been?
Once, okay.
I'm at like 2 or 3. I forget because I've done outpatient and inpatient.
Yeah, so far so good. Just one breakdown. But my mom her bipolar disorder was severe on both ends. So she had real high mania periods and real.
Was this study in the Eastern Washington and Tri-Cities, or was this something that happened like University UW?
I have to do some research and ask around, but it was a state or national study because she was such a severe version of bipolar disorder, and she got electric shock therapy. She took lithium. Through the history of bipolar disorder, because when I grew up, she was called manic depressive. So that was a term that was used mostly through the 80s and 90s.
Right.
And then bipolar became used to kind of, either as a euphemism or to try to decloak some of the kind of scary aspects of the mental illness. And so, she was hospitalized 22 times. So there's routinely, I would visit her in a mental health facility, a behavioral center. And, weekends we're seeing her, and suddenly, not without a mom.
Right. But it didn't ruin your family.
No,
because they had insurance.
We had insurance. Now, I have no idea what my family would have been like. I mean, my dad probably would have divorced much earlier just because of financial havoc. Yeah. I mean, you actually couldn't be married to my mother if you didn't have health care.
Yeah. I know about that kind of situation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, people get married for health care increasingly. I mean, I jokingly tell a friend that what we should do is just start asking for polygamous marriages so we could actually get everyone covered. That's what we should just start marrying people that don't have health care.
Well, I have to admit that I've been married twice, which is ironic because I'm someone who rails against the institution of marriage.
We're on the anarchish perspective. So
exactly.
And of course, it was surprising to my wife that we got married too, given my politics.
Fuck the patriarchy, like I'm not. So it's ironic that I did, but two entirely different situations in my life. But the second one, the health insurance was a major factor in the decision to do it. Otherwise, I really don't think. I mean, we would have still lived together and all the rest of it. But the second marriage was someone that I met actually at mental health outpatient program.
That's a hot place for dating, actually. This is we've seen it in films occasionally, but it's actually a much more interesting place to meet people.
I've lived it.
Well, there's a solidarity. There's a solidarity when you see that crazy and the other crazy eyes.
It was exciting. We had a lot in common.
You could try to so almost like almost like cycles for periods when you're in the same house. Your cycles for your mental health would mirror each other.
Well, I just have major depressive disorder. I mean, not just, but I'm depressive, right? So I'm severely depressed and suicidal.
And I'm on the opposite side. I have what I would say hypomania.
And she was like you, not like you, but she was of the bipolar.
She's on the higher end
of the bipolar nature, and it really was incredibly impactful on her life. Like much more than you don't know nothing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? No offense, but like she's really suffers. And shortly after I met her, she was about to lose the insurance coverage plan that she was on.
Yeah.
And so, it became a major factor in our decision to
do
that legal arrangement.
And so for me, the healthcare scare for me, what tremendously violent and scary was during the recession. I was working ECR and it was not, didn't have any form of tenure as a lecturer. And, I lost my job for 3/4 out of a 6-year period. So I was actually completely unemployed, and I had filed for unemployment several times because
is this after the kids were born?
Yeah. So Sakura, my daughter, was born about basically 2 years after that, a year and a half. We knew down the pipeline that the funding for the UC system and public university system was going to be in a shithole, and enrollment actually went down tremendously one particular year, and I was, of course, on the bottom of that food pyramid. And so, it was incredible stress. And so each time I would be off, I was like, oh, great. And I get this thing in the mail called Cobra, right? Because my wife was dangerously worried and concerned that I wouldn't be able to afford my medicine. And
Cobra is for...
It's like something
it's an extended period of coverage for spouses or family members who...
So basically, it's one of the things that is memorable and important, which is when people lose their jobs, they have the right to keep their health care, especially if they have pre-existing conditions. It protects them. And so they can keep their health care because they wouldn't be allowed to get it.
I had to, when I got divorced, had to do some paperwork about it. But is this just a California thing, or is this a...
I think it's a state or federal law. But the problem with it is you have to pay the full cost.
Yeah.
So we had to pay like $1,700 a month.
Yeah.
A month. I mean, it was financially devastating. Devastating. So we're pinched between the point
and for
of
you with a family that's in
it's like, will I ever be hired again if I'm in the cuckoo house? And then who pays those bills?
Right.
And so it was horribly traumatic for my family. It's like, oh great, so $1,700 a month, and what about all the other bills? And what about all the other things? So my wife had to quickly find work and went back to waitressing again because principally we just
to pay for health insurance.
And so we were always saving up for Cobra because there was periods where I just wasn't having health care. So I might have, and in the summer, if I didn't have work, the summer sessions didn't count for UC Riverside, I'd be on Cobra again until I had your contracts. I mean, that was a while down, way, way down the line. So until I hit a certain percentage, my union was able to guarantee coverage at UC Riverside. So it was very traumatic to feel that pressure, like, oh, I'm taking money from my children and I need health care and I'm destroying my wife. I'm like just making her terribly anxious and we have to pay rent and bills. And I'm like, this is savagery.
This is part of the precarious position for part-time and instructors and adjuncts and lecturers.
It's medieval.
Right?
It's medieval.
Right,
It's
which
medieval.
we'll talk about more.
Yeah, and so
upcoming episodes.
we've talked about obviously food. We talked about shelter.
Shelter. The
and
third part of this golden square. These 4 fundamental
cornerstones
that should be the basis of any cooperatively minded society.
Essentially, fuck the Constitution. Here are the 4 things.
Here's the new fucking Constitution.
These things should have been in the Constitution.
Right.
So when we talk about life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, like the outro from the homeless guy from last week said, definitely it wasn't cash. It was, what is happiness? Happiness is like not having to worry about these 4 fucking things.
Yeah. Well, it's you're not. There's some conscription on your freedoms unless you have these 4 things.
And the paradox and irony that a child is guaranteed access to K through 12, but will lose their house from foreclosure.
Right.
Right. And the same thing goes here. It's like, how can you fundamentally take care of your family if you can't get medicine to keep your body working?
Right. So we're talking about these things, trying to frame them as a set of things that should be considered basic human rights.
Yes.
And to certain degrees, I think we'll get into the discussion here about healthcare. This may have more of a consensus around the globe as such, but
and pull the frame back. I mean, you have a pot of money. Any society should be organized on these 4 things. Fuck everything else until that pot of money is used to meet these basic things.
Right.
Here's a pot of money.
Don't buy any fucking bullets until you.
Fuck your yachts.
Yeah.
Fuck your tanning equipment. This is actually the fundamental aspects of human life. And
exactly.
When it comes to government, state, legislature, you should be evicted from your position if you can't guarantee these rights.
Well, these 3 things so far, you can't fucking survive without these things.
Yes.
Like you can't physically survive without
the golden
food,
the golden
shelter.
square is really the order is about how quick you'll die.
Right. Right. Exactly.
So the quickest way you'll die is not have food.
Yeah.
The second quickest way you'll die is like not have shelter when you're in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
The third thing you'll die, and especially as we get older, is health care, and health emergencies. Especially if the DNA lottery, you get fucked up and you're born with all these diseases. Well, screw you.
Well,
and so these 3 things are part of the way that we prevent unnecessary death at points when you should be living a full life.
And again, all of these are the problems really about distribution. It's not about. It's not about it's not a scarcity problem.
Yeah, it's not that we don't have enough money for healthcare. And like you said, this completely asinine question, well, how are you going to pay for it? Well, what are we already paying for?
Yeah. Okay.
That could pay for these things.
Okay. So, all right. That's where we stand.
That's the framework.
Okay. The most common regurgitated vomit sort of response, right? That
what part of the orifice is that coming out of?
It's coming out of all of them because it's just like this. It's this steaming pile of
vomit shit multi-projectile
that the neoliberal program has like infected everyone with. Right? Is this knee-jerk response? With all due respect to everyone who has a differing opinion, but the knee-jerk response whenever you talk about these things, and clearly we're talking about these things should be free.
It's neoliberalism as Tourette's.
Right, exactly. It's the neoliberal Tourette's.
It's like an autoimmune disorder when I hear these questions. And go ahead and list the question.
So,
what is the statement that says this?
You just want fucking handouts. You lazy mom's basement dwelling communist, right?
Yeah. That is the
You're just looking for handouts.
Number one
fucking
Tourette moment.
Lazy piece of shit. So defend yourself, Matt. How are you not a lazy basement dwelling communist?
Laziness has nothing to do with universal rights. Okay, so party next door.
Is that what's going on? So there's a party next door. So if you hear some jubilation in the background, they're just celebrating that they just got healthcare for free.
They actually just had.
It must be a sign that
they had a home delivery for the heart surgery.
Right.
Yeah.
Or they
found an organ in an ice chest and they're celebrating because they can save their family.
Well, they had a delivery from Cuba of all their medications. It was
Yeah, so
a
this
cent on the dollar.
autoimmune question, which is like, it doesn't matter if you're lazy or not. You deserve intrinsic access and rights to healthcare. I don't care if
Okay.
it's not even about laziness.
So there's one point that it's not about laziness. It's about decency and compassion for
Dignity,
other humans. And
compassion.
Dignity. Okay. So still, that doesn't convince me of this. You're fucking. So what? I'm compassionate. Just work for it. You know, the same way that I do. Fucking, I'm not going to work to pay for your fucking free healthcare and food and roof over your head because you just want to sit there and play video games and smoke pot.
I have a 7-year-old daughter. She has no healthcare because I don't have a job that gives me healthcare. Is she lazy?
And stupid.
So she's just genetically lazy and stupid because magically the blood works that way.
Yeah.
DNA flows down to just stupidity.
Exactly.
So I'm lazy. And so my daughter, who had no choice in where she was born, how she was born, and the geography she was born, she doesn't have healthcare? You fucked
No. Okay. Try to respond to the argument without.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm just getting emotional.
Exactly.
Getting emotional.
You should go to the hospital
Touch
for that.
myself, and I want you to touch me. No, I'm serious. Like, why? I
mean, you must. Hey, so you're in.
Is it 7 degrees of laziness? Is it Kevin's bacon game? I mean, I'm sorry, 6 degrees of laziness. So why does she not deserve?
When you're that lazy, it's the 7th degree.
Why does my daughter not deserve health care?
Well, you better fucking. Why don't you get a fucking job and get
I'm
her
working right
healthcare?
now. It's part time. I don't work enough to get health care. They won't give it to me.
Fucking stop being lazy and work full time. Work 40, 60 hours a week. Do the American thing and get 3 fucking jobs.
But if I work 3 jobs and I work literally 70 hours a week, I would be full time by any definition for hours. But they're still not going to give me health care because they want to save money.
Well, get a better job. Don't fucking go.
I'm
just
trying.
flip burgers.
I'm trying. I have a college degree.
Fucking try harder. I don't know. I can't do a very good job of this.
Let's just feel how that falls apart into like mildew. I mean, like that is just such a horrible argument to make.
But don't you get this a lot? I mean, you're an activist working on the single payer issue. So
yeah, I mean, you hear this with activists, where when you try to transform society, the most common thing that was said at Occupy was get a job, as if everyone was unemployed and therefore had no rights or purpose for actually making any ethical commentary. Well, so like having a job gives you the right to say something.
Right. And we're going to be talking about universal basic income and similar sorts of ideas coming up in discussions here in the coming weeks. So the same thing is going to come up, right? The same sort of retort, this neoliberal Tourette's syndrome, right? Vomit.
Yeah. Neoliberal Tourette's syndrome.
Yeah, is the same.
NTS.
NTS. You got a shitload of acronyms there, Mr. Academia. So we have to have sensible responses to this because we can't just devolve into a name
match.
Into a name calling, mudslinging, because then we're just like the politicians, right? We got to be able to have. We got to be able to get around the corner of this like Tourette's that we have, whether it's your anti-capitalist Tourette's or the neoliberal Tourette's and the NTS, right?
But I mean, the notion is, and George Lakoff has talked about. He has some books about framing metaphors and how people think through a kind of metaphoric logic, like what he calls framing. And so the liberals viewed, in accordance with George Lakoff, as the nurturant co-parents. Liberals are the nurturant co-parents who believe that the way to solve problems is work primarily through prevention, whereas in the conservative ideology of the framework is, well, you are the punishment daddy, right? You're the strict father. And so that's the framework in which how conservatives and liberals explore these. And others have noted there's actually neurological aspects to this. It's not just something that's even about persuading people. When they neurologically have these tendencies and values, how do you persuade them? Because facts haven't been working for liberals for a long time. And so you either borrow their framework or you emotionally reach them in a way that bursts that frame, right? And we know that humans are primarily emotional. Hence, that's why the prefrontal cortex was so late in the delivery for humans. That's what college is basically about, is developing the prefrontal cortex. So if you're going to persuade these people that have, neoliberal Tourette syndrome, one of the things you have to think about is like, am I going to use their framework or in their frames, or these metaphors inside of us, or are you going to tell a story that's so emotionally powerful that it forces them to confront the suffering they see.
So are there some stories like that in this fight for universal healthcare?
I think fundamentally, most people, when they try to use those frames, it's very hard for them to argue inside of them because there's a revulsion about it. And liberals know these frames, and some people that train and do canvassing, they know these frames, but they don't necessarily, use them. And it's because they're so repugnant. These frames are so gross. But what I find to be the most convincing way of getting to it is telling stories. It's witnessing. It's, the Saul Alinsky idea that you have to, and I know Saul Alinsky has problems as a methodology in some ways, but the idea of the personal narrative is a powerful one.
Right.
That's what Chavez used so often with United Food Workers is first tell me your story and why you're doing what you're doing.
And marketing people, advertising industry knows this.
Yeah,
this is
absolutely. Reach it in the heart and pull in first. And so the testimonial, the witnessing aspect of why you're committed to what you're doing appeals to people because people love to be inside other stories.
And at least in the political realms, it seems that the quote unquote left hasn't done a very good job of this, right?
What's happened
is ironic, if the left is, if Hollywood is
feeling touchy kind of thing. Well, and this is, I think, part of the reason is because the liberal establishment is so college educated, they kind of stare down at the idea of making emotional appeals.
Well, and we have this, as you framed it before, TDS. We've got this terminal dystopia syndrome.
Yeah,
so the stories that we tend to tell are just dystopian ones and not as opposed to utopian ones.
And, the Jon Stewarts and Rachel Maddows, they want to provide you a fact sheet of data, but data is a horrible way to persuade people. And this is a problem in rhetoric. So I teach in the university writing program at UCR, and if you look at most composition books on persuasion, they equally lay out the fact in their ideas that rationality and logic is just as important as pathos or emotions. Pathos, logos, and ethos. And in reality, how arguments work and change happen is through emotional storytelling.
Pathos,
logos, and ethos. So
just
pathos is emotions.
Yep.
Logos is the use of logic.
Yep.
And ethos is integrity or the appeal to integrity.
Yep.
Common values, shared values, but also that the person themselves, as a person making this argument, are trustworthy themselves. So the information, the source of it does matter in terms of us being persuaded. Hence Donald Trump versus Bernie Sanders. They could say things that have emotional appeals or even logical appeals about an unfair society, but when you look at the person's own background, it's obvious.
So here, let's test this out a little bit because we've got some stats and we've got some stories. So let's sort of compare. And so for the listener, which is more convincing about this argument here? So one, we can talk about the failures of the U.S. healthcare system as being the only quote unquote developed major country in the world that does not have some form of a universal healthcare system, and how absurd that is, along with the facts about what we spend on the healthcare system. The U.S. spends now over $3 trillion a year, nearly $10,000 per person, a total of over 17% of GDP, of gross domestic product, for healthcare services, which is at least 50% more than the next highest spending country, and the lowest percentage of public financing for healthcare. But we have some of the worst metrics on the quality of healthcare. We have the lowest life expectancy of all major developed countries. We have the highest infant mortality, and medical expenses are the number one cause of personal bankruptcy.
And I think that's 50% of all
and
bankruptcies.
your story about the struggle in your tenuous situations in the years
we were trying to scrape as much money together because Cobra was killing us.
Like, you didn't go bankrupt, right? But many folks...
Well, and it's not like I did or would have had a nervous breakdown again from my bipolar disorder. It's just the fact that I, by every account and any account, the thought of racking up thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars of being hospitalized was scary for my family. So it was the idea that, I couldn't work if I had episodes. Where's that income
or
coming from?
even if you had an accident, right? Even if you had a split-second wrong turn of your steering wheel and ended up in a car accident like so many folks do each year, that could have sent you into bankruptcy, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Like could today, right? You could be driving home back to Riverside tonight and this could happen, and that could lead you towards bankruptcy, right?
Oh, and I think
so. Okay, so there's
these
logic,
abysmal numbers.
There's some stats, but we could then sort of personalize that a little bit, right? So maybe I can do that a little bit.
The confessional, the story,
right? So I am extremely lucky. I'm 40 years old and I don't have any major health issues and haven't had any major physical health issues aside from my mental health issues. We talked about before on the podcast. Serious and severe and long-lasting chronic depression, which is extremely dangerous, right? I am suicidal on a regular basis. So one of the first things when I start to awake in the morning is thoughts about suicide. And there have been many occasions where that has become so serious as the point of potentially acting on that, right? Sort of thing where they're like 5150 you. If a mental health care provider, you tell them that you're suicidal, and if I tell anybody about these things, then they could put you into a inpatient program. So often I'm in a place like that with my condition, where even though I have health insurance, I have a stable job and a relatively decent health insurance, I shouldn't say health insurance plan, I still have co-payments and deductibles. So I know that if I go into an inpatient program, which when you're suicidal like that, you often need to take that kind of measure to protect yourself and others. I know I have to pay a $250 copay. Wow. And that doesn't sound like much, and it's not really the whole, it's but
still access. But
it still has been at points in my experience where that was too much. I didn't have $250 to spend, where that prevented me from seeking that care.
That was the copay. That's extremely high copay, yeah.
Even with the decent health insurance package that I have.
Well, in the UC being the biggest employer, what does that say about? What does that say? We both work for the UC system, but what does it say about our healthcare system when you're having a copay and you work full time for the biggest employer in the state?
I was seriously nearly dead, and I don't seek medical attention because of the copay.
Yes, and this is the biggest problem with Obamacare, is that we have massively high deductibles for people that on paper look like they have health care, but they can only use it if it's a fucking catastrophe. So they don't get the preventative care, which ultimately means that it will be a fucking catastrophe.
And that's a really low copay. I mean, for a lot of compared to a lot of plans and for a lot of different sort of circumstances that people find them in, often one of the major things that hits people, and I actually had this recently, is the ambulance fees, which can be easily $1,500, $2,500 or more. Just they can be really outrageous depending on how far they have to transport you. If you are in an emergency medical state. I had a concussion 8-9 months ago. Anyways, at the beginning of last fall, I had a concussion when we were on a work retreat. I fell in the parking lot and hit my head on the concrete, and so went to an urgent care place, and then they took a look at me and sent me over on an ambulance to a hospital to get an MRI.
Would that have given you better coverage because it was a work-related thing?
Well, fortunately, because I did see all the bills that got sent, but because it was a work thing, I had workers' compensation, which covered it.
Thank you.
Thankfully. Socialism. But it would have been $3,000-$4,000 right there just for taking a spill on the sidewalk. And
Do you have a high deductible currently with your form of healthcare coverage within the UC system?
that's it. I like that Matt did air quotes healthcare because I'm trying to make that point. It's like we have health insurance systems, which is a different thing than healthcare systems. And this is in all the debates needs to be a point of clarification because there's a difference between having healthcare and having health insurance.
Hence air quotes.
Hence air quotes that need to be thrown all over the place when you're talking about these things. But no, I have a pretty good plan, like I was saying, and even the $250 for a mental health service inpatient program isn't that bad, but it's enough that, depending on your circumstances, can be the difference between seeking medical assistance or not.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing is we can talk about this, but number one, there should be no anxiety about whether you go to the doctors or not. You don't need an extra barrier. I mean, people that are hypochondriac, no problem. They're going to go whenever they can if they have great health care. But there should be no barrier.
If they have great savings.
Yeah, well, this is the thing is like, so you might be afraid of going to hospitals, number one. That's already a crisis.
Right.
You might be afraid of the cost. But if you're afraid of whether you can even afford it, that is the most weird barrier that you're not ever supposed to have.
It's sad.
So it is actually more important. So the money is more important than your life.
Yeah.
That's essentially our current system.
And that's what, with all of these three things, why we're such flabbergasted about them, is because for all of these, for food, for shelter, for healthcare in our system, and especially heightened here in the States,
money is rights.
Money is rights.
Yes.
Money equals rights.
Humans are rights.
No.
And body rights that come from them. But that the money,
it's all about the
money is the immediate barrier. So we have, millions of Americans that forego, push off, avoid going to the doctors. This is not because they're even frightened or just fears of mortality and also things that might happen, like you suddenly get cancer and you're going to just check out a bump, but that you're worried about the cost.
Yeah. So when we say medical expenses are the number one cause of personal bankruptcy, well, I'll leave a few links to sources for that argument because there's some debate about, given the studies that have been done, there's some debate about the degree to which that is the case. But according to a study from Harvard a few years ago that said that there were 62% of personal bankruptcies in the U.S. were related to medical expenses. Of those folks who declared personal bankruptcy, 3/4 of them had health insurance plans. So just having a health insurance plan clearly isn't enough to like.
Yeah, I mean, let's think about this. And when we were talking about as a system, there was much ballyhoo about Obamacare, what was going to happen to that. But when we actually look at the current rankings of systems, Obamacare at itself, why certainly a landmark. We have to remember that this was Obamacare was an idea that came from the Heritage Foundation as a compromise to ward off Ted Kennedy's dream for universal health care coverage.
The AKA Obamacare.
Yes.
Is
actually a Nixonian idea that is now suddenly this massively progressive, celebrated thing in the country.
The Affordable Care Act.
Yes, affordable, not guaranteed act.
Yeah, and also have I don't know why we keep calling it Obamacare. It's the Affordable Care Act.
I think the problem with healthcare is that it's attached to a patriarchy. So it's Trump care, it's Obamacare.
Yeah, we need to fucking stop this.
Stop attaching it to patriarchy. It's like that's already gross.
Daddy,
which version are you going to punish me with? And then affordable, as if it's still a commodity.
Yep. Oh yeah, totally.
It's within the neoliberal framework, and the fact that shit's so conservative in this country in terms of political apparatus that liberals champion an idea that would be a normal conservative idea.
Well, this would just be ridiculous in most other parts of the world. Affordable, like the healthcare is a right. God damn it! What are you talking about? Make it affordable. It should be fucking free.
Well, and the polling was if you say Obamacare to conservatives versus the Affordable Health Care Act, you get different polling. But I mean, if you actually look at systems,
I remember seeing when they're like asked the same question in two different ways. And what do you think about Obamacare? And they're like, fuck that. And then what do you think about the Affordable Care Act? Oh, that sounds good.
The labeling is so powerful.
Yeah,
the labeling just blocks out the ability to rationally think.
Well, that's why there's
tribalism.
That's why the cereal aisle looks like it does.
So you can see different rankings for healthcare systems. Or can we imagine better ones? I mean, I think one way to think about this is, Michael Moore's most famous film, or one of his famous films. I shouldn't say the most famous, since Fahrenheit 9/11 made the most money than any documentary. I think over $250 million. A film that was really,
yay for the money.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we're talking about. Most famous. I once again, I'll put air quotes on that too. But at the time that he was doing it, France was the number one healthcare system. So, now it's Germany overall as a healthcare system.
You didn't say the film.
Sicko.
Yeah. 2007, I think.
6 or 2007.
It was 2007.
Yeah. We'll put that in the notes.
It was still George W. Bush.
Yeah.
There are clips of George W. Bush.
Yeah. And so, France was the best system. But if you actually look at healthcare systems in the world over, I'll just go ahead and just give you the list of, according to U.S. News, these are the systems, the public healthcare systems, and
is this
public healthcare systems.
Is this the ranking?
Yeah. So as of January 2017, Denmark has the best healthcare system. Not surprisingly, it's the second happiest place on earth after Norway. Now used to be the happiest. Now it just has to go back to number 2.
As we go through them, let me look at because I have the expenditure list.
Denmark is number 1 for best healthcare system, public healthcare system. And overall rank is number 10 for overall quality and merits as a system.
And they fund it 85 for the expenses on healthcare come 85% from public funding, and they spend $6,400 a year per person
versus 10,000
versus 10,000 from the U.S.
Almost half.
Yeah.
And the second one is Sweden in terms of best healthcare system. Overall healthcare quality is number 5. And Sweden was also one of the top 10 happiest places on the earth.
And Sweden's about the same, 84% from public funding and $6,800 a year per person, or 11.9% of GDP.
Notice the total domination of public funds and the commons to make that guaranteed right.
Yep.
And then Canada has which Americans always talk about when they talk about crappy healthcare systems. Guess what, dear America? It's got the 3rd best healthcare system in the world, and it ranks 2nd overall.
And this costs just $5,200 per person a year.
Basically half.
71% from public funding.
You said 10,400, I think, for the U.S. or something.
Well, it's just under 10,000.
Yeah, so we are literally talking about half the price. Half the price.
You get such...
Canada's one that's used the most, right? It's used all the time. Waiting.
Closest,
I go to Kaiser Permanente. It takes 3 months to get an appointment.
Well, in Sicko, in Michael Moore's film from a decade ago, he talks to a few Canadians. He talks to a conservative Canadian out on the golf course, and he's just explaining how, the healthcare should be free, even from a conservative viewpoint. It's viewed as a right and not a privilege. And he also talks to this woman who goes across the border from the U.S. in order to
There's a business in Canada that provides private. Is it a private health insurance when you're traveling, because they know that they can't get it in the U.S. So before you cross the border, make sure you get your health care.
Oh, right. There's also that. His relatives of his were going to come to the U.S., but they were like, no way we're going to cross the border without getting insurance.
It is like they're talking about going to Mexico or Guatemala or something.
Because they're like, no way we were going to have something happen to us when we're in the U.S.
The logic of the war zone is often used in some cases that are much safer. So I think one way to think about why does the Canadian conservatives, the most conservatives, would think of it as a common sense, reasonable. What are you, fucking crazy?
Yeah.
I remember him being in a golf cart with a conservative saying,
that was this guy.
Are you fucking crazy? You don't have, why would I do something that nasty? And I think, one way of thinking about that, of course, is the way that the political theorist and journalist Corey Robin talks about, which is if you actually look at conservative ideology in general, it accommodates itself to egalitarian movements where it just becomes or accepts certain notions that were part of emancipatory movements or within progressive culture, which means that conservatism are largely reactionary because it doesn't want to change notions of privilege, and it adapts to changing notions of what is acceptable privilege.
Right.
And that's what happened in Canada.
Right.
Canada had a time where conservatives didn't think this was good for markets or freedom. And then they had it and they're like, oh my God, actually, it's not such a burden. And actually, it seems like a fairly decent human right.
Yeah, and then just go on.
And you accommodate it, exactly. And so
you accommodate it, and then you go on eating up the world in other ways.
And Corey Robin talks about
There's plenty of other ways to...
This notion of accommodation in his great book, The Reactionary Mind, Conservatism from Edmund Burke to Sarah-Palin. So he talks about how what will happen in the U.S., well, it will just fundamentally change. And when gay marriage was supported by the Supreme Court, like overnight, Fox News just kind of changed its perspective. Yeah. And certain Rupert Murdoch certainly didn't care about it that much. He's a libertarian.
Yeah, we'll move on.
We'll move on.
This is if we can get
a permanent win
here with a single payer system, a universal coverage to every American, like we'll move on.
Yeah,
like, we'll just it's not going to like destroy. It's going to. Actually, let's talk about that. Let's move on to.
Oh, should we just go? I want to go.
Oh, you want to have some more of the countries? Yeah,
countries. So we stopped with Canada at number 3, right? And that was
number 3,
and number 2 overall for quality of healthcare.
Canada.
I remember the sign. I'll mention this one last thing, which is when the U.S. surprisingly beat Canada in a gold medal match for hockey
in 1984.
Yes. Are you thinking about? Or is that the one? Or I thought that was the Russian. No, that was 1980, the one where they beat the Russians, right? The Miracle on Ice. Was that? Not the Miracle on the Hudson.
No, the Miracle on Ice. That was against Canada.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Right?
Yeah, I guess so. And so there was a funny...
Wait, Google that real quick. Because, come on, I don't want to be embarrassed on a hockey thing.
Okay, so was it
Miracle on Ice? Miracle on Ice.
Miracle on Ice. I'll type it up. But I was going to say is there was I think it was a match that the Americans were going to be obliterated by for hockey, and we won, and there was a sign by a Canadian super fan that said, "We lost, but at least we have health care." That was it was memed around, I think, when one of the last Olympics cycles. It was we beat them, and it was totally unexpected. It was like considered the sequel to the Miracle on Ice, and she had that funny banner saying, "Hey, we might have lost, but we at least have health care."
Yeah.
what a dig.
1984 Olympics, right?
Well, it was 1980. Boom. 1980. Oh, I said I got the date right. I just forgot about
80.
The country.
Yeah.
So a total miracle. Total miracle. Upstarts. But the because it was supposed to be so one-sided. But I think the idea we can talk about is that if this says anything, it says that Canada is the one that you should be celebrating. Right?
What you're saying is you look forward to the day that the U.S. hockey team can beat the Canadian hockey team, and we have universal health care.
So I want to get back to that girl and say, look, you can't do that anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't do that anymore to us. So, and then the 4th best public health care system as of 2017.
You know what we should do? You know what we should do? Sorry, I keep interrupting you.
Cock blocking.
Right. What we should do is we should boycott the Olympics until we have universal health.
We should put up health clinics around. We should have competitions for quickest dental surgery.
Yeah. So all you winter sports
exactly.
athletes.
And then on the inner circle, to make the more interesting, we can have plastic surgery. So as you move farther into the center, you get more unnecessary surgeries versus
okay. Sorry.
And so
I keep blocking you.
Okay. Exactly. 4. So United Kingdom is the best healthcare system at number 4 on that ranking, 4th best, and its overall rank is 3. Now this is interesting because Jeremy Corbyn ran on a campaign. We'll talk about that too, of making the NHS, National Health Service, better than it currently is, and it has some problems because it's being chipped away at by the Tories, the Conservatives,
and they currently spend
8%.
9% of GDP, $3,900 per person per year.
Ouch. 3,900. 3,900.
83% from public funding.
And let's talk about this. This is not Canada where it's Medicare for all up there, where there's a lot of private aspects. NHS is a government-controlled system, and it's less than half. So suddenly that's a problem? I mean, government taking over my healthcare? Well, you don't even have it? You have high deductibles, dumbass.
But this is an interesting thing compared to the States about the recent electoral activity and the recent political activity in the UK is that the the Tory party, the Conservatives, are trying to cut funding to the NHS,
Chip
right?
away at it.
And
they say, of course, on paper we support it, but they're trying to nudge in some privatization.
But this is a big part of the grassroots public reaction to like try to kick them out of Parliament is, or at least to chip away at their majority. And the support for Jeremy Corbyn is like, don't fucking take away the funding for public health care.
And it's the moral anger that these nurses who are loved in Britain haven't gotten pay raises in several years, maybe 7-8 years since the recession. So they haven't gotten pay raises. So they're already people that have health care, but they're saying it's not good enough.
Right.
And so Jeremy Corbyn's promising to pump.
Why isn't that the fight that we're having here in the States?
So Jeremy Corbyn's platform for the manifesto is
it's ironic.
$30 billion pumped into the system.
Yeah.
Which, not surprisingly, you take from the top 5% of the income bracket. No big surprise there.
Weren't there things in the manifesto? There things in the manifesto about the parking fees for for hospital visits too? Like, we'll get rid of the parking fees for.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There was a guy that was putting glue in the parking fees to make a comment about how there should be no barrier. Okay, so once again, they're talking about a barrier to get health care because of parking fees for the elderly.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother moral argument. Right now, we have free parking at many of these hospitals, but it's a fucking $3,000 deductible. It's a $250 copay, and they're fucking upset.
They pay for parking.
They have to pay for fucking Looney Tunes. Fucking Looney Tune country we live in. This is a savage country.
Yes.
And so, when we look at that, we can say, yeah. And then after United Kingdom, which is fourth best public system, then rank overall for quality for healthcare is 3. You have Germany, which is number 1 now, not France. When Michael Moore did Sicko back in 2007, 2006, it was number 1. And he talks about all the vacations people get when they get cancer.
You're saying it's number 5 now?
So Germany's number 1 for best overall ranking according to U.S. News, or the study they did, and number 5 for the best public healthcare system.
Oh, okay.
So that's what I'm saying. So it's now the number 1, it's top banana. And actually, if you watch Where to Invade Next, which we'll have a podcast on that, it talks about how when you're stressed or depressed, you go to a spa clinic and have daycare provided for your children.
And just a little note here on about that. Hey, we haven't made multi-million-dollar movies, but we'd love to have you on the podcast. So I know we're nobodies and we're not famous.
You're welcome to come on, Michael Moore.
Fuck being famous.
Yeah, we can critique celebrity.
Hey, I mentioned that I was certain that I was going to be famous. That doesn't mean I want to be famous. I don't fucking want to be famous. Anyways.
Always think you're saying you're going. So now you're saying you're going to be famous.
No. Remember, so episode 3, we talked about celebrity, and we talked about our own relationships to that, and I talked about how I was certain I was going to be famous, right? Yes. It was like not a doubt, but I don't want to, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so the 6 best public
Let me give you the stats on Germany. So Germany, $5,400 a year per person, 77% of spending from public sources, and 11% of the GDP.
And then the next one for best public healthcare system, not Affordable Health Care Act, not Obamacare. It's Netherlands, number 6. Another Nordic Scandinavian country doing its duty.
Look at that. $5,600 per person per year, 87% from public sources, and under 11%, 10.9% of GDP spent on healthcare.
Shocking. And then Australia, I can just slide through the rest. We don't have to go all the data. Yeah, so Australia is number 7 for best public healthcare system, 6 overall. Then France, which has dropped down, and I think this is a result of probably the recession, number 8 and number 8 overall. So, and then Austria, number 9 and number 12 overall. And then New Zealand, number 10 and number 11 overall. And New Zealand's really interesting because New Zealand had a much lower ranking according to the 2000 study. The World Health Organization did a study of best healthcare providers or systems, and New Zealand was down pretty far. So they've actually improved their system. I think they were at 27 or something like that. We were at 37 in the World Health Organization in the 2000 study. It was the first global study of healthcare systems
Or
and overall
37.
quality. 37. So Cuba was 39, the dreaded communist state. Which, by the way, if you look at the data at that time in 2000, Cuba had a lower infant mortality rate than the U.S. So there's commie bastards doing something better than us. So let's just ignore it. And once again, I think that tells you that things can go up or down based on, of course, the global economy, but also based on needs and desires. And New Zealand has considered to be the least corrupt political system in the world. And as a result of that data, there's been an outflow, obviously, of having better healthcare. So they've cracked that 10 top list.
Well, and all of these systems are unique. Well, or
different mixes.
They're different mixes of public and private institutions and healthcare providers and funding schemes and what have you.
And we should go through the terminology and frame of universal healthcare versus single payer healthcare.
All right.
Right.
Well, break it down.
So universal healthcare is a notion that everyone has universal rights to healthcare. That's a cloaking term that lame-o neoliberal Democrats use, which is saying, well, we'll just have Kaiser Permanente everywhere. So we'll just have the fucking private market go crazy and keep subsidizing that shit with no cost controls. But everybody has universal access / rights to healthcare. And you'll meet many Democrats in California where they'll say, I believe in universal healthcare personally, but I just don't like this single payer system.
Yeah, you have a universal.
It's a bait and switch.
Yeah, you have a universal monopoly for profit healthcare.
Yeah, so it's important to know the terms you're using and how you're using them. Because
so single payer.
So single payer itself is that there will be one dominant system, which may or may not allow for a private system. The private system is something you attach on top of it. So those that have wealth or prestige have something on top of it that's layered.
Right.
And you can see this in other parts, like Japan and Canada have some private healthcare additional kind of like
you can buy more stuff if you want to.
Pretty napkins, exactly. But the fundamental rights to healthcare, and it doesn't come from, it comes from the private sector by the wealthy themselves.
Right. So we have a single payer system in the States, right, called Medicare, which is
almost the majority of what we pay. I think, right.
Well, it's a big chunk of it, but
48%.
Yeah. But it's
Medicaid and Medicare.
It's a single payer program means one health insurance program that's the same for everybody, right? You get, and typically this is a state or government run.
It has to be. Yeah, there is no single payer that guarantees the right without the government. And this is the shitty logic that I get libertarians to complain about, is that they say, well, it's a government takeover. It's not going to work. And I'm like, well, where's the single payer system or the universal system that is entirely private?
This is some other bullshit logic too, and also just some sad reality check for us when we deride something because it's
we deride it because it's the commodity question.
Well, no, we deride a system because it's provided by the government. So this is an ironic thing about a supposed democracy. That why are we so contemptuous of anything of quote unquote the government or any system of social welfare that's provided by the government if it was in fact a democratic system? Because if we say the government, it should mean in a democracy that's us. Yeah. Right? That we're providing it for each other. But clearly, like
the corporate structure will never be democratic in the way that's outlined with a neoliberal framework or neoclassical economics. But a government can be a cage, and I agree. I'm of course fundamentally I'm an anarcho-syndicalist. I'm a social anarchist, and the state is an end time problem we have to get rid of. But the states come in different size cages,
right?
And you can have a government that is democratic and responsive to the needs of people, i.e., democratic socialism. You can have authoritarian or totalitarian governments, but the government by itself doesn't necessarily mean that you live in an authoritarian state.
No.
But if you're inside a corporate for-profit business that's on the stock market, it can never not be authoritarian.
Right.
There's no way out of there's no participatory model of a entirely commodity-based healthcare system that will somehow free us.
Right. So
the single-payer universal healthcare is the framing we're talking about, and that's where we can go.
So where are we at now? Since I'm posed this to you, since you've been involved in maybe you can share a little bit about what's going on currently with the fight for a single-payer healthcare system. As Bernie Sanders put it in his campaign, a Medicare for all. What's going on right now?
Well, there's two competing things going on. There is the bill that is a Medicare for all bill that's been going on for quite some time, being proposed almost every year by congressmen, and it's got the most number of votes and support and sponsors. And so on the federal level, there's a call because of Trump Care coming down the pipeline, or whether or not it happens is another thing, but it's every year this congressman puts forward a Medicare for all bill. It's not actually Bernie Sanders who's been doing it, but each year there's more.
Who's this?
I'm trying to think of that. I think it's HR 676.
Right.
And let me see, who's the person?
House Resolution.
He's not
676.
widely known. Exactly. He's not widely known. I'm trying to think of the author of the bill. Let me see. Yeah. I remember now. Representative John Conyers. He's on the House and Energy Commerce Committee, Ways and Means and Natural Resources. And he's put this up for several years. And this has the most number of supporters.
This is a quote unquote Medicare for all, like taking our existing single payer program that is just for Medicare, just for elderly and disabled folks primarily, and expanding that to
and this year it's had the most because there's been a fundamental shift in the polling on Medicare for all, which is that 58 or 60% of Americans now support a Medicare for all system.
Yeah, recent Economist YouGov poll from this year, I think it was April, framed the question in two ways. Like, do you support a universal health care for all Americans, or do you support Medicare for all? Both of them, like majority of Americans across the spectrum and across demographics, are in favor.
And that is the total,
of both of these ideas.
Total irony of
40% of Republicans and Trump voters are in favor of these.
That's the total irony of quote unquote Obamacare, is that when the conservatives got the Congress, the Senate, and the president all locked up, they tried to put together something that was obviously horrendously shittier. And then the polling went up, which is like, okay, they tried, I complained about Obama and they're doing worse. So the polling shot through the roof for Medicare for all because they're like, okay, both sides tried it and they're both shit. They both fucking suck.
They do nothing for
different
real
degrees.
people.
I'm not deriding the idea of expanding healthcare as an evil on the world, but where Trump Care is actually just trying to take excess of $300 billion and move it up to the 1% by cutting the subsidies for expanding healthcare.
Right. But we do have to say the Affordable Care Act, which is just
a Nixonian idea, is still the best thing we've seen happen in Congress.
It's a mandate that every American buy insurance and systems to help make that quote unquote a little more accessible to somehow affordable to buy insurance through these marketplaces and what have yous, right? Through this bureaucratic means. It has done one thing that's seen as a positive over these past few years, which was increase the number of Americans who have health insurance.
And it has saved lives.
Right.
And this is what we're finding out. People with pre-existing conditions, kids that are now can be insured over 26. It's gotten more popular for certain things, but also that it actually just increased the coverage. So we used to have something of about 46, 50 million without healthcare. Now we're on 29, 30. And it would have been more if the southern states, or the slave state nations, as I should call them, they blocked actually taking money that would have helped their bottom line. They actually hurt their own spending and their budgets by not taking it because it was Obamacare's dreaded socialist takeover.
But the Republican quote unquote Trump Care proposals,
Ryan Care is what we're
Ryan Care proposals,
another man,
would put, I think they say
24 to 27 million
people off of insurance.
Exactly.
Yeah. Get us back to where we were before.
And in some ways worse. Especially if you're elderly. And it also increased costs for folks on Medicare. So it'd be gutting aspects of the cost coverages for Medicare. So it'd make Medicare worse.
So it makes sense that anybody paying attention would be like, fuck this bullshit.
So that was Obamacare. And this is Trump Care?
What the fuck are you guys playing at?
And so there's an opening.
What kind of fucking bougie tennis match is this? Fuck you guys.
Yeah, and that's the thing is now there's a shift. And so the fact I think we have something like 114 people, I think almost all Democrats, signing on for Medicare for all is interesting. But once
meaning
once
the
again,
HR 676, the House resolution.
yeah, and so the notion is that what can happen is that we could get a Medicare for all system, but the Democrats aren't all in unison in support, and they're also still the minority. And a lot of Democrats, they're like these things with indivisible and move on. They want to celebrate and support Obamacare, but they're not using this opportunity like Bernie Sanders would want for people to advocate for something above these problems.
Right.
This is a beautiful moment where Democrats could stand for something and say, okay, well, you don't like what we have. You saw what they're garbage. So let's do Medicare for all. Let's mobilize for this.
A real fix. And like so much of the rest of the world, like this isn't new or radical. It's just plain fucking sensible and
efficacy.
Yeah.
Is it effective?
And I think part of the most frustrating part of this discussion is actually not only would this provide more extensive health care, not just insurance, but it would provide more extensive health care. It would enable a higher quality of health care.
Free movement. Let's think about this.
Wait.
We'll talk about it.
And it would be far, far less expensive.
Yes.
Right? So there's a number of factors.
Conservatives always talk about money, and expense or efficiency.
So
but suddenly they don't want to talk about this.
No. It's just it's not. So Bernie's Medicare for all sort of thing in his platform, it would save $6 trillion over 10 years in healthcare spending. Individual families would save over $5,000 a year, and businesses would save nearly over $9,000 a year on expenses for employees.
Especially small businesses. Because the current system privileges big businesses that can afford healthcare at larger bargaining rates, where small businesses get obliterated because of healthcare costs.
This is clear when you look at these other countries that you read off the list there, the ranks. This is the case where it's tested. We have so much data about this.
This is reality-based information, but it's not getting through in the way that it could. And so what's happening is there are, of course, the project of arguing and debating with people we love in our family and our relatives. And then there's also just the political class itself, which is deeply entrenched by the private health insurance system, as well as, the pharmaceutical industry. And it's important to remember that Max Baucus, right, the Senator Max Baucus from Montana, received the most money from the healthcare industry in 2007, 2008, primarily because he was the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee. So he could block out Medicare advocates from actually talking about this when Obamacare / affordable health care was being talked about. They were blocked out of the congressional hearings because Max Baucus got so much goddamn money.
Right.
And many of these committee appointments, and this is something we'll talk about much more later, is money in politics, blocks out what's possible because of the funders, the fundies, the funders, the 1%, the corporate class, those that have privilege and want to maintain their privilege. And so what's talked about gets limited. So instead of getting a public option, you just talked about different types of expansions of the private market.
Right. So what you're referring to, public option, was in the debate leading up to the passage of the Affordable Care Act.
That was the high point you could bargain for. And if you do, you need
no. You got to explain that a little bit.
Yeah. So okay. So there's the notion of the private market, which is people that couldn't afford health care would be given subsidies to go into a private insurance market using Medicare. Actually, Medicare taking Medicare money, giving more Medicare money to then. Medicare would go in and give money to private insurance companies to set up these markets, right? That would be underwritten by Medicare money. Rather than being in Medicare, it'd just be sent to private insurance. It was a giveaway to the private insurance lobby. And there was another thing, which was a public option, which meant that if the private sector couldn't compete for those costs, people could go into a different pool called the public option.
Right.
Which, by the way, when we talk about congressmen and senators and ask about their health care, they got a sweet deal. And so that would have created some price competition and which would have illustrated the effectiveness potentially of public sector, public use money.
Right, which the public option more sort of
lots of problems,
but sort of a selective or sort of test a single payer kind
And
of
it wouldn't
thing,
have- it
right?
wouldn't
You could
have-
opt in to do a sort
Actually,
of quote
yeah.
unquote single
And
payer.
it wouldn't have
program.
lasted forever by itself, but it would have been a great rhetoric to see, hey, here's the private, here's the public market, what's better? And then you could make the argument for Medicare for all. But what happened was by Max Baucus blocking out, right, blocking out people from talking about Medicare
Even
for all.
talking about it,
Even
yeah.
talking about it congressional. They were not allowed in the room.
Right.
And because of the money.
Right.
The money in politics. And so the range of debate becomes limited.
There was it was like a nightclub.
Yeah,
You know,
it's like
you had to pay.
yeah, exactly.
You had to pay to get in the door.
The folks that block the door, the
Bouncers.
the bouncers, right? The bouncers block them from even expanding the range of debate. And
Right.
of course, this is the problem with community organizing and that model with Obama's experience with it versus union negotiation and being a trade unionist. You take the most radical position first, and then you stitch down toward whatever the middle, whatever becomes the middle. But by blocking out single payer advocates, universal healthcare advocates, you narrow the range of the debate. You're accommodating the right. So you're moving the goalpost before you even start.
Right.
And that was the strategic blunder. But this is, of course, comes from Rahm Emanuel, which is, use a crisis to get something done. And let's triangulate. So let's just work immediately with the people that might block us and then make some type of trapeze act where we co-opt the private sector.
Proven to be totally failed strategy.
Fuck strategy, exactly. Now we're back into the kind of same thing,
horrible.
which is like it's better than what we had.
I mean, if we are to assume that the strategy is intended to get us towards any better future, it's failed. But if the strategy is, as cynics may say, to actually confound that,
and look at this. I mean, Dianne
progress
Feinstein did a town hall. She never does town halls, right? She's totally corrupt. Her husband's multimillionaire, billionaire, so deals with defense contracting. But when she was asked in a town hall, she actually used the term that Medicare for all is it's government takeover. That is a Democratic senator.
Fuck?
In the town hall, she said it's Democratic takeover. This is
government takeover.
Exactly. And a friend and activist, Lauren Steiner, actually asked her about this. Like, what do you actually represent if you're using Indivisible and these other support systems from George Soros to support and protect Obamacare, but not get something that's more popular? Because within this kind of cage-like system of Democrats celebrating what they thought they had accomplished, which isn't working well enough.
Yeah, we don't want too much democracy. Like,
no, we don't want that. We just want the massage of democracy. Maybe
we just want the slogan of it. That's all.
Exactly.
Just the slogan.
Yeah, the Democratic Party as a slogan, and that's about it. And the debate within the Democratic Party in California is interesting. So that's what's possible potentially on the national level, but on the state level, there's things going on in California.
Right. So here in California, we've got some exciting sort of momentum, it seems like, for this new push for State Bill 562, which is a single payer initiative for the state of California. And you've been involved in this. Right?
Yeah, I'm of course in the Riverside County Inland Empire area, but Inland Empire is Riverside County and San Bernardino County. It's kind of combined as this kind of the New Jersey. I call it
catcher.
I call it the New Jersey of Southern California, right?
The catcher's mitt.
It's made fun of. It's teased relentlessly. People drive through it, but it's actually a really wonderful place that I've come to love and I live in. And in that area, my organization, my nonprofit that I started back in 2012 wasn't a nonprofit then; it was an affinity group within Occupy Riverside in 2011, part of the Occupy movement. Is the idea of getting money in politics with a 28th Amendment. So
getting money out of politics, not in politics.
Yeah. Sorry, let's preposition. So getting money out of politics,
right?
All right, and separating them apart, separating the corporation and state to create exclusive public financing, right? And forever sever private wealth from politics. And so the 20th Amendment for us is
exclusively public financing for elections, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exclusively. So there is no money other than public financing. Norway's system, I think, is something like 74% of its funds come from public financing. I think the other 26% come from private membership fees or dues. So Norway, number one, remember, Norway's number one in the world. It has a very strong public financing system. And so
number one in the world, what?
Well,
hockey team?
I'm sorry, happiness. Yeah, not happiness.
Okay, there you go.
Maybe skiing, all right? So underwriting skiing a little bit. But yeah, and of
the
course,
number one skiers.
And of course, everybody's got like $1 million of retirement because of the crude oil massive taxation and reabsorption into the state. So there's a reason why it's the happiest place.
Okay,
so Norway has public financing. 28 is about public financing.
Right.
And one of the biggest things that you see every day as a wound site is healthcare and the for-profit insurance lobby.
Is that a pun as a wound site?
Yeah, as a wound site, exactly. Okay. And then, of course, the big pharma. And so they own so much of not only the Democratic Party, but Republican Party, and they pretend that they have these huge differences. And so the 28ers, our organization's been pretty much a key central organizer in the area trying to get SB 562, which is called
Healthy California.
Healthy California Act. Yep. And the history behind that is there's organizations working with this. And I want to give a shout out to how amazing they are. There's the Campaign for Healthy California, California Nurses Association, and the National Nurses United, right? And nurses would know more than anyone about how horrible the system is. And remember, they're the most trusted profession in the United States. So why don't we listen to them? They see death and birth all the time.
And when Bernie was at the People's Summit in Chicago, he gave a shout out to the success of the bill so far. You're going to get to this, but that the SB 562 has passed the California State Senate, and shout out for that success and to the nurses associations, and it got one of the biggest responses ovations from the crowd. Yeah,
and it's remarkable because what it does is
this is a serious thing and a serious thing to be hopeful about.
This could be historic.
This could be historic.
Now, I will mention that there's something going on just very quickly in New York where they're very close from getting their own single payer system in New York State, and they're about one vote short from having the numbers to pass it. Of course, funding is a whole other thing too, but they're also in the process for single payer. So we're kind of racing against each other to be the first in the country, right? And single payer
and lead the way.
Yeah. And there's been attempts in Vermont after the failures and the sadness of not getting single payer instead of getting Obamacare. Bernie Sanders wrote in the bill giving the ability for states to set up their own single payer program. So what ended up happening is, as a result of that, Vermont was able to try to start a single payer system, but they didn't have the money. It's a small, loosely populated state. It's actually one of the smallest populations in the country as a state, just very small. And the governor said they didn't have the money, and so it didn't go through. And they
were close, but no cigar.
They didn't have the funding, exactly.
Okay.
And then in 2016, there was something called Colorado Care, which was another attempt through a ballot initiative process to create a single payer system in Colorado, but it was organized very top down. And so that failed, and tons of millions of dollars from big pharma as well as private insurance went into destroying it, creating fear tactics, and the voters nailed it down. And it was a pretty bad loss. I think it was something like, was it 60-40? I can't remember. It was a really bad loss. Maybe it was 80 to 20%. I don't remember how bad. But
and this isn't the first time that there's been a bill proposed for single payer in California.
I think the dates are 2005, 2007. The Democrats passed, I think, in the House and the Senate in California, a single payer bill, and Arnold Schwarzenegger vetoed it both times. Right. So it's happened before in California. Now, whether that's authentically done for a real reason is a good question, because it might have been to score points, like similar to like the Republicans. It's not really clear why they do that, knowing that Arnold Schwarzenegger would veto it. And it's interesting because we're having a bigger uphill battle for SB 562 because Obamacare / Affordable Health Care Act.
Right.
I don't even really care which term we'll use, but I don't like Obama, so I'll just say Obamacare. But yeah, exactly. So essentially, it's more difficult this time because
can we call it neocare?
Neocare, neoliberal care.
Yeah,
yeah. So the interesting thing now is we're getting shockingly more difficulty than maybe 2005, 2007 because Obamacare expanded the private insurance market in California. So they have even more money than they had in 2005, 2007, because you have more people
making money.
And so, ironically, that money from Obamacare is being used to lobby against the bill.
Right.
And the Senate is much more progressive in California than the House. The House has got a huge section of it that are called the Mod Squad, which are these moderate Democrats. and they major in a huge number in the House. And we've been fighting the 28ers, other organizations, the California Nurse Associations, lots of organizations sponsoring for it. We've encountered these difficulties where we know that there's money circulating around under the table, which is putting Democrats in a bind because they say they believe in universal health care when we meet them, when we legislate, agitate, when we come to talk to their representatives in their office, which is another whole joke too, that it's very hard to get them when it's a controversial bill. They just ask a representative to come for them, one of their employees, to pretend that they're the voice piece of them.
Right.
And so what we're finding is that we'll say, oh, well, they believe in universal health care, but how is it going to be paid for? Which is exactly what we were talking about earlier. It's like, can you pay for it? It's the cost. Right. Do we have the money for it?
So where are we at? Just really quickly, where are we at with the bill and its prospects right now?
Right now we're red hot heat. It's passed through the appropriations. It's passed through, it passed through the health committee first, then in April, then it just passed in May, late May. It passed.
This is the California Legislative.
Yeah, SB 562 is the health committee. Then it passed through the appropriations committee, which is like, do we have the money for this?
Right.
Can we have it?
And
then it got a vote on June 2nd. I want to say June 1st, June 2nd, June 1st. It got a vote in the Senate, and that was a big deal.
California State Senate, and they passed it.
They passed it. The vote was 23 to 7, I think.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And I was, of course, furious because Richard Roth, who we've met with, we canvassed for, some of us have as organizers, and who's part of the mod squad.
He abstained from the vote, right?
He abstained twice. He abstained on the
committee,
the health committee,
mm-hmm.
which is insane because he gave a supportive question and suddenly had to take a pee break. And there you see his empty chair,
and
mm-hmm. he's abstaining because
then he abstained from the vote.
Well,
right?
Once again, money in politics. His wife is, part of the California Chamber of Commerce, right? So a member of that. So there's a kind of Chamber of Commerce doesn't support this bill. And so he's abstaining, and he abstained again. Even when his own representatives told us that he would vote for it, he abstained for the Senate vote.
Right.
And he was one of the only 3 Democrats to abstain, and 1 Democrat voted against it, even though he once again believes in universal health care.
And so in order for it to pass, though, it's got to now go on to the California House of Representatives, right?
We need 2/3 for the funding part. We can pass the bill with simple majority, but we have
to get 2/3 of the California House of Representatives, right?
Because anytime you raise money or raise costs for something, you need 2/3.
And then it has to go to the governor's office, and Jerry Brown has to sign it for this to
Well, there's a lot of headwind. I mean, once again, it's important to remember, for me as an organizer and activist, that that you're largely often going to lose as an activist. But you can't avoid the fact that the impossible never happens until you actually try.
Happens, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
and suddenly it was possible, and you're like, oh, of course it was going to happen.
And I think what we have to realize more and more, I mean, just needs to become clear, is that the media's role in all of this. Because if we had a responsible media, an ethical, robust journalism to act as the actual fourth estate in this country, and to actually inform people, this would have so much more momentum than it already does. Mm-hmm. It would just be being reported. I mean, because we lack visibility. It's not even. It's one. The amount of coverage is just infinitesimal.
Mm-hmm. Like climate change.
Yeah, like in regard to its potential impact on people's lives, and just the sea change of.
Oh, KTLA, cat in a tree. Oh,
exactly.
Random murder. Oh, kid got hit by a car.
And so then when it does get the 30 seconds to a minute of coverage, even on the outlets like National Public Radio, it's framed in an entirely dishonest and misrepresented way. The lead in to the stories are always like, it is going to cost $400 billion.
Yes, that was the Sacramento Bee, right?
Sacramento Bee.
Their logic was it's going to cost $400 billion, which, by the way, it's a conservative press. It leans conservative. But what wasn't mentioned was the advocates for the bill, the MIT study, which says, hey, actually, it's going to cover fucking everyone, including our brothers and sisters that are undocumented.
Right.
and it'll be $37 billion cheaper, and actually $71 billion if you calculate in terms of other calculations. So it's cheaper right now to cover everyone through that system. No co-pays, no deductibles, a card, and you walk through.
Right now, with the system we have, this horrible fucking insurance system that we have now, it's $400 billion.
Yes.
Roughly. Right, the state of California spends.
Well, and this is what they're not acknowledging in the cost. It'll cost $400 billion, but they're not looking at all the things that, exactly.
It's going to cost us less.
Yeah.
And not only is it going to cost us less than we pay now.
In California.
It's going to open up all kinds of possibilities that are also, like, even if, hey, look, you could be...
Free movement.
Even if you're...
Medicare for all or SB 562 within California allows you to move.
If you're... Okay, explain that a little bit.
Okay, so we don't really understand how we are not free, how we are caged animals in the state, in the corporate neoliberal state. That free movement, people can't move because they're wage slaves where their health care is attached to their job.
Right. So the free movement means, hey, if I quit my job, if I get fired, if I want to look for a different opportunity, I don't have to be locked into this job because it's the only way I get healthcare.
My aunt is elderly, but not on, for instance, my aunt is elderly, but not ready to get Medicare, not 65, whatever the age is. And she can't move from the Bay Area to Southern California to help me with my daughter who's just been born because she can't find a job that has healthcare.
Right.
Now, she would move for a part-time job, easy, if she had healthcare. So I'm going to punish her by not allowing her to move in with my family.
Right now, the dominant way, more than half of Americans get their health insurance plan through their employer.
Yes, if you're under 65,
it's part of what locks you into this wage slavery conditions, aside from your mortgage and your student debt and everything else, is your health insurance, right? This is your vehicle for obtaining health insurance. And so a single payer program like this, SB 562, would free that up. Yeah. That's a shackle that's removed.
And this is not a new paradigm. Let me finish this. It's not a new paradigm. This isn't something nakedly new and weird. No. Tommy Douglas, the most famous and beloved Canadian, was a social democratic politician and Baptist minister. And he's actually related. His grandchildren are Kiefer Sutherland. His grandchildren as Kiefer Sutherland, who everyone knows from...
I haven't watched this yet, but there's a documentary called The Healthcare Movie or something that Kiefer Sutherland narrates.
In Tommy Douglas, let's talk about emotion. We talk about testimonials. He almost lost his fucking leg, right? This child lost his leg. The doctor said, your parents can't pay...
A bear attack?
I don't remember what, but he almost lost his leg. And this is like a young child, 10-year-old kid.
Right.
And he almost lost his leg. He's sitting there in the hospital with the doctor. He's going to get his leg cut off. And the doctor says, there's no way that I'm going to allow this to happen. I'm going to pay for you to keep I'll pay for the medicine.
Right.
Noble, beautiful doctor, right? And so Tommy Douglas never forgot that.
Right.
The pain and anxiety, the shame in his parents' face. So his entire life was based on creating single payer or, Medicare for all. And
so everyone would have that kind of story.
Well, so no one would have that story, right? That.
Well, no. So
So
exactly,
no one would have that story. That this would never be a story, right? I mean, the joke in the meme about Breaking Bad is like, oh shit, he's in Canada. That plot doesn't happen. Yeah, exactly.
That's a good point.
The plot of
that is a good
Breaking Bad does not even fucking work because it relies on.
That's a good argument there. That's why we need to keep.
I need to do Breaking Bad memes for the next fucking 5 months to get SB 562.
Well, that's a good argument to keep the system we have because then we get better TV.
Exactly. So let's have another round of suffering. Guess what? There's maybe 10,000 years of human history. We can always look for that suffering.
We want House of Cards and Breaking Bad more than we want healthcare.
Exactly. And so Tommy Douglas created single payer or Medicare for all through this largely massively rural state that no one can pronounce or spell named Saskatchewan. And it was so popular, it spread like just as wildflowers, right? And it got adopted by the Canadian government. Remember, Harriet Tubman said herself that I could have freed more slaves if I knew there were slaves. And we live in a system where healthcare has made us slaves to ourselves and our loved ones.
Yep.
We are not acknowledging that we have jobs we hate because of healthcare. Yep. We can't move because of healthcare.
Yep.
We are slaves in this fucking system.
Yep.
Remember, Martin Luther King said that the cruelest form of human injustice is that of healthcare, right?
Yep.
To paraphrase common. There is nothing more cruel. When Martin Luther King went to haunt the spots of Muhammad Gandhi's resistance movement, he had to acknowledge the fundamental crisis of poverty in healthcare, and that healthcare is the cruelest form of injustice. Because when you are at your weakest, when you are physically suffering, nothing can help you.
And that's part of why it's acknowledged as such as a right around the world, except for in the States.
Once again, when you lived in a hunter-gatherer society, you had the universal right to the shaman, right? Mm-hmm. So we've moved away from very basic rights, which is that you could see the shaman. Mm-hmm. Suddenly, magically, with the state and capitalism, our values, our intrinsic beliefs of love and compassion are obliterated by an idea of healthcare as a commodity. Mm-hmm. So let's move back to universal rights of healthcare.
Yeah. So one last point we lost there that I think is a useful point is that, all right, even if you are fucking capitalist, you're a owner of capital, you count yourself as a quote unquote entrepreneur, since that's supposedly such a big part of our cultural movement.
The risk takers, right? Not the single mothers having children. They're the risk takers. Let's remember
having single payer, universal healthcare is going to be an economic stimulus, because I can't go and work for a startup, a small entrepreneurial thing if I'm going to drop the health insurance that I have with my current employer.
Japan's automotive industry was largely driven by two things. One, the production of Jeeps in Japan for the Korean War, which built the automotive industry startup, and then its advancement into the U.S. market came largely as a result of it having a good healthcare system. It could outcompete price-wise American cars because of its Medicare for all, its public healthcare system, so actually more government-run. And so it actually could outcompete Ford and GM in the price point because they had a better healthcare system. Hey, so there's your market shit.
Yeah,
eat that one up.
It's going to cost less, and it's going to stimulate the economy.
And it is a commitment.
It's totally like this is a thing that, and I think also why it is part of so many other countries, even though we're in this fucking bizarro land of this neoliberal dystopian reality that we live in, that we still have, that there are actually 50, almost 60 countries in the world that have some sort of publicly funded universal health care, is because it doesn't work in contradiction to the accumulation of capital.
Pakistan's having fucking drone warfare, and it has by Americans, and it has maternity leave. I mean, come on. Yeah. Where are you at? And so let's move to this so we can move to other issues. And if we get healthcare solved through a public commons solution, we can work on other issues. If you care about other issues, well, shit, we can focus on those now.
Yeah, this is why it's one of these basic ones.
And we also break the myth that markets will solve everything when people see that their taxes actually do something every day in our lives.
Yes. Well, we didn't even really touch on this, the amount of taxes that go to Medicare as it is now, but
is locked by price points that the lobbyists decide, like the Medicare Plan D.
And like this is actually going to save us individually on taxes. Yeah. So it's just the logic behind resistance for this has to be seen as completely absurd and in opposition to basic human needs. Like, come the fuck on. Yeah. Seriously.
Yes. Let's do this.
Count me in as one of those people who believes that health care is a right, not a privilege. Count me in as somebody who believes there is something very wrong when the United States of America is the only major country on earth that does not guarantee health care to all people as a right. Yes, the Affordable Care Act has made progress. A lot more people have insurance today than they used to. But 29 million Americans still have zero health insurance, and many of you are underinsured with high deductibles and high copayments. In my view, we must move forward toward a Medicare for all single-payer program.
Count me in.
You fucked up, America. You fucked up.
Let's stop fucking up. Let's make a mixtape.
As
all of
Nina
us.
Turner said for the SB 562 rally that we had before the DNC convention, which we, by the way, invaded. The SB 562 and nurses invaded the Democratic convention, whose president of the delegate system, the California Democratic Party, has received $150,000 from Big Pharma, right? But supports it. Nina Turner said, "Stop talking about the Russians and tell me what you're going to do to give us universal single-payer health care."
Yes.
Stop talking about Russians. Give us fucking health care. Be the Democrats. Remember, the Labour Party created NHS in Britain.
Yep.
Where's the Democrats?
They're going to save it, hopefully, JC. So let's make sure this happens. Let's get involved. Let's
Take action.
take action.
Stop fucking up.
Let's stop fucking up.
Stop hiding in your video games and Netflix streaming and embrace the physical world.
No. Watch some stuff and play some video games. That's okay. Once in a while.
But we'll have an argument about this. And we talked about this as the entertainment industrial complex, right? We talked about this with celebrity, and I say this is the bigger machine, which is, sure, have pleasure. But don't go to the virtual world to the extent that you can't do anything in the physical world.
Yes.
Sure, I love video games. I love...
So,
but
if you haven't...
disappear from us right now.
Don't disappear.
SB 562.
And if that's news to you, you haven't seen info about it, we'll leave links
on the show notes.
All the stuff we discussed. Find those in the show notes. Find those at thefutureisamixtape.com. There'll be updated stuff, and that we'll share as these efforts move forward on Facebook at facebook.com/thefutureisamixtape.
And remember that this podcast is based not just on discussions of solutions, but it deeply believes in the implementation of them.
Yes.
So as us, we're committed to activism ourselves.
Yes.
And so it's not just talk about it, but we're going to do it together.
Yes. And find us on Twitter at Future Mixtapes. When you visit the website, sign up for the newsletter. We'll try to send out once a week. And
next week we'll talk about the final node of the Golden Square.
Yes, we'll complete the square, the fourth and final cornerstone.
And we'll touch back on all these with more pinpoint, more targeted discussions, but we're going to get to that fourth part of the Golden Square.
Until then,
cheers.
Cheers.